Some days start with a fresh cup of coffee and a sense of calm. Others begin with an uninvited guest in your driveway. It was a crisp Saturday morning, and after a long work week, I was looking forward to finally enjoying my weekend. But as I pulled into my street, a strange sight made my stomach drop. A car I didn't recognize was sitting in my driveway. I slowed down, blinking in disbelief. Maybe it was a delivery driver, a lost visitor. But no, the car was parked neatly, engine off, as if it belonged there. Confused, I double-checked the address. My house, my driveway, my property. With no other choice, I parked along the curb, a rare find in my neighborhood, and walked up to the car. A deep sigh left my lips as I pulled out my phone and checked my messages. Maybe my wife had a guest over. Maybe one of the neighbors had visitors who parked here by mistake. No texts, no explanations. Just an empty, out-of-place car blocking my driveway. I decided to handle it the polite way first. I grabbed a small, sticky note from my car and wrote, "Hey, just a heads up, this is private property. Please don't park here. Thanks." With that, I tucked the note under the windshield wiper and went inside, shaking my head. I thought that would be the end of it. I was so wrong. The next morning, I walked outside expecting an empty driveway. Nope, the car was still there. Not only that, but my note, my polite, neighborly note, had been crumpled up and tossed onto my lawn like trash. Now, I'm a reasonable person. I know people make mistakes. But when someone deliberately ignores a warning and then disrespects my property, that's when I stop being nice. This time, I left a much clearer message. Private property, do not park here, final warning. I made sure the bold letters were impossible to miss and slapped the note onto the windshield. Satisfied, I went about my day. When I got home later that evening, I was certain the problem would be solved. But as I turned onto my street, my headlights caught something that made my jaw clench. The car was still there, and this time, it wasn't alone. Standing next to the car was a woman in her mid-40s, arms crossed, expression set in stone. She looked up just as I stepped out of my car, her eyes narrowing like she was the one being inconvenienced. I didn't even have time to ask before she scoffed. "Oh, it's you." I frowned. "Me?" "Yeah, the guy who lives here," I replied. "I assume this is your car?" She nodded, completely unfazed. "Yep, I park here sometimes." The sheer entitlement of her words made my head spin. "You park here?" I repeated, my voice slower this time, as if I had misheard. "Yes," she said matter-of-factly, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "The street parking sucks and your driveway is always empty. It's just easier for me." For a moment, I genuinely thought I was in some kind of hidden camera prank show. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "Right, well, this isn't public parking. This is my driveway. You can't just use it whenever it's convenient for you." She rolled her eyes like I was some overreacting child. "Oh, come on. It's not like you're using it right now." My fingers twitched at my sides. "That's not the point. It's private property. I left 2 warnings, both ignored. This is your last chance. Move your car and don't park here again." She let out an exaggerated sigh, clearly annoyed that she was being held accountable for something so trivial as trespassing. Finally, she pulled out her keys and climbed into her car. But before she backed out, she rolled down her window and called out, "You need to relax. It's just a driveway." I gritted my teeth and watched as she drove off. I thought that would be the end of it. Again, I was so wrong. A few days passed without incident. I started to believe that Olivia had gotten the message and moved on. Then Saturday morning arrived. I stepped outside with a cup of coffee in hand, ready to enjoy a peaceful weekend, until I saw it. Not only was Olivia's car parked in my driveway again, but this time, there was a second car right behind it. I nearly dropped my mug. I took out my phone and snapped a picture. I wasn't wasting my breath on another conversation. Instead, I made a call. 30 minutes later, a tow truck rolled down the street. I leaned against my porch railing, sipping my now lukewarm coffee as the tow operator got to work. The cars were lifted, hooked, and removed within minutes. And I enjoyed every single second of it. I didn't have to wait long to see Olivia's reaction. An hour later, I was back inside when I heard the loud, angry stomps of someone storming up my driveway. Then came the furious knocking. I opened the door to find Olivia standing there, red-faced, phone in hand, practically shaking with rage. "Where is my car?" she screeched, pointing an accusing finger at me. I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Which one?" She let out an inhuman growl, fists clenched. "You had no right to tow my car. None. This is illegal." I leaned casually against the doorframe, unfazed. "Actually, it's perfectly legal. I gave you multiple warnings. You ignored them. So I took action." Her eyes darted between me and the empty driveway, as if trying to will her car back into existence. Then, with a dramatic huff, she declared, "I'm calling the police." I shrugged. "Go ahead." And so she did. And because I had nothing better to do that day, I decided to stick around and see how this played out. 20 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up. Olivia ran up to the officers like a dramatic soap opera actress, hands flailing. "That man," she shouted, pointing at me like I was a wanted criminal, "stole my car." The officer turned to me, raising a brow. "Sir, is this true?" I pulled out my phone, opened my gallery, and showed them the photos. "Nope. She parked in my driveway repeatedly without permission. I left warnings. She ignored them, so I had her car towed." The officer looked at the photos, then at Olivia, then back at me. After a pause, he let out a sigh and turned to her. "Ma'am, a private driveway is private property. He was well within his rights to have your car removed." The color drained from her face. But I live here," she spluttered. "He's being unreasonable," the officer shook his head. "That doesn't give you permission to use someone else's property." With a final huff, Olivia stomped off, muttering something about how she was going to make me pay. I just smiled and took another sip of my coffee. "Oh, Olivia, you have no idea what's coming next." After Olivia's public meltdown in my driveway, I figured she'd take the loss and move on. Maybe she'd swallow her pride, find another parking solution, and pretend this whole thing never happened. I was wrong, so wrong. The next morning, I stepped outside to check my mail, and there it was, an official-looking letter taped to my front door. I frowned, tearing it off and unfolding the paper. The bold letters at the top made my stomach sink. "Homeowners Association Notice of Complaint," I groaned. "Oh, come on." According to the letter, a concerned resident, I wonder who, had filed a complaint against me for creating unnecessary conflict in the neighborhood. The HOA, in their infinite wisdom, decided that my refusal to allow Olivia to park in my driveway was causing tension within the community. I read it twice, just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating from lack of caffeine. They weren't demanding I pay a fine. They weren't threatening legal action. They were strongly advising me to be a more cooperative neighbor and consider allowing Olivia to use my driveway on an as-needed basis to maintain community harmony. I nearly laughed out loud. This had to be a joke. The HOA, the same people who once fined a neighbor for using the wrong shade of beige on their mailbox, were now defending someone who was actively trespassing on my property. I crumpled the letter in my fist. This wasn't about community harmony. This was about entitlement. And I wasn't about to roll over and let Olivia win. Later that week, I received another letter, this time, inviting me to an HOA meeting to discuss the complaint. Now, I normally avoided HOA meetings like the plague. They were nothing but an excuse for nosy neighbors to argue over the most ridiculous things: mailbox heights, grass lengths, holiday decorations. But this time, I was showing up. When I arrived, the meeting was already in full swing. I took a seat near the back, watching as the board members sat stiffly at the front of the room, their perfectly polished name tags gleaming under the fluorescent lights. And then, of course, there was Olivia. She was seated near the front, looking smug, clipboard in hand. Oh, great. She came prepared. It didn't take long before the board addressed the issue at hand. One of the HOA members, a guy named Greg, cleared his throat and read from a sheet of paper. "We have received complaints about rising tension between neighbors due to parking disputes. In an effort to maintain a peaceful community, we'd like to address this issue with a fair solution." Before I could say a word, Olivia launched into a dramatic speech. "I just don't understand why he's being so difficult," she said, shaking her head in mock sadness. "I only ever parked there because there's never any street parking and it's just one car. He never even uses the driveway," I snorted. "Oh, so we were just making up facts now. It's not fair that some people in this community hoard resources," she continued. "We should be supporting each other, not trying to get each other's cars towed." Several people in the audience nodded sympathetically. That's when I realized something. She was playing the victim. She wasn't just here to complain. She was trying to turn the neighborhood against me. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Fine. If she wanted to play this game, then it was time to set the record straight. I stood up, meeting the board's gaze. "Let me clarify a few things," I said, my voice firm. "This isn't about sharing or being a good neighbor. This is about personal property. My driveway isn't a community parking lot, and I never agreed to let Olivia use it." I turned to face her directly. I left 2 warnings, both ignored. She even crumpled up my first note and tossed it onto my lawn. A few people murmured at that. Olivia's fake innocence flickered for a second. Then, after multiple warnings, she parked in my driveway again, this time blocking my garage. I turned back to the board. So I had her car towed, which, by the way, was perfectly legal. Greg shuffled his papers, avoiding eye contact. I wasn't done. Let's not forget that she tried to escalate things further by calling the police on me for stealing her car. Now, people were really murmuring. I let the silence hang in the air before delivering the final blow. And now, instead of admitting she was wrong, she's trying to get the HOA to force me to let her trespass on my property. Pause. Then someone in the audience muttered, "Wait, she called the police." Another voice. "Yeah, that's a bit much." The tides were turning. Olivia let out an exasperated sigh. "This is ridiculous. It's just a driveway. You're being dramatic. And you're being entitled," I cut in. "This is my home, my property. You don't get to decide what happens on it." She opened her mouth to argue, but Greg cleared his throat. "I think we've heard enough," he said. The board members whispered amongst themselves before finally delivering their verdict. "After reviewing the situation, we will not be requiring the homeowner to share their driveway." I exhaled, tension leaving my shoulders. Olivia, however, was fuming. "Unbelievable," she spat. "I hope you enjoy being the most hated person in this neighborhood." I just smiled. "I'll sleep just fine." With that, she stormed out of the meeting, nearly knocking over a chair on her way out. The HOA had ruled in my favor. But something told me Olivia wasn't finished just yet, and I was right. After the HOA meeting, I thought Olivia would finally back off. The board had shut down her ridiculous request, and the neighborhood saw through her act. It was over, right, wrong. Because the very next morning, I stepped outside and found something taped to my garage door. At first, I thought it was just another flyer or some neighborhood announcement. But as I got closer, my stomach tightened. Bold red letters screamed from the page, demanding my attention. Before we dive into what this meant, and trust me, it was something outrageous, just a quick reminder. If you're enjoying this story and want to hear more dramatic showdowns like this, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring these stories to life, and we truly appreciate it. Now, back to the aftermath of Olivia's decisive actions. I ripped the notice down, my irritation growing with every word. Violation notice parking infractions. I scanned the paper, my grip tightening. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." Apparently, I had been reported for violating neighborhood parking regulations. According to the complaint, my car had been illegally blocking community access, and if I didn't correct my behavior, I could face HOA fines. I nearly laughed out loud. She actually filed a complaint against me. It was so obvious this was Olivia's doing, and I had no doubt she thought this little stunt would intimidate me, but she had no idea who she was dealing with. I marched straight to the HOA office and slapped the notice onto Greg's desk. "Are you serious?" I asked. Greg sighed, rubbing his temples. "I had a feeling you'd be in here." "Yeah, well, I have a feeling this is complete nonsense," I shot back. "I park in my own driveway. How exactly am I blocking access?" He exhaled slowly, then leaned back in his chair. "Look, Olivia's been persistent." I raised an eyebrow. "Persistent? She's been coming in every day since the meeting, claiming you're violating some kind of obscure parking rule," he admitted. "Honestly, we've been trying to ignore it, but," he gestured at the paper. "She insisted we issue a formal warning." I crossed my arms. "So let me get this straight. She parks on my property, ignores my warnings, I get her car towed, legally, and now she's trying to punish me." Greg gave me a tired look. "Yes, that about sums it up." I exhaled through my nose, forcing myself to stay calm. "So what happens now?" "Honestly," Greg sighed. "Just ignore it. We know it's bogus. Unless she provides actual proof, we're not going to pursue any action against you." I narrowed my eyes. "And if she keeps harassing me?" Greg hesitated, then finally said, "Then you might have a case against her." That got my attention. I left the office with a new plan forming in my mind. If Olivia wanted to play dirty, I'd play smarter. A few days later, my neighbor Sarah texted me. "Hey, Olivia's going door to door with a petition. Thought you should know." I stared at my phone, baffled. A petition. I stepped outside, scanning the street. Sure enough, there was Olivia, clipboard in hand, stopping people on their morning walks. She talked animatedly, making exaggerated gestures toward my house. I walked over to Sarah's porch. "Please tell me she's not doing what I think she's doing," Sarah smirked. "Oh, she is. She's trying to get people to sign some petition about community parking rights or something," I groaned. "Is anyone actually signing it?" Sarah snorted. "Not a single person so far." I watched as Olivia approached another neighbor, an older man named Mr. Davis. She barely got through her rehearsed speech before he frowned and shook his head. "No thanks," he muttered before walking away. She huffed and moved on. It was almost pathetic. After a few more rejections, Olivia spotted me watching her and froze. For a split second, I saw the hesitation in her eyes. But then, like clockwork, she squared her shoulders and marched toward me. "Something you want to say?" Olivia asked, her fake smile barely hiding her frustration. I crossed my arms. "No, I'm just impressed. Didn't realize you had this much free time." Her nostrils flared. I'm advocating for fairness, she snapped. Unlike you, some of us care about the neighborhood. I raised an eyebrow. Fairness? You mean trying to bully the HOA into giving you permission to park in my driveway? She scoffed. You're the one making this a bigger deal than it is. If you just let me park there, none of this would be happening. I chuckled. Right. Because when someone ignores boundaries, the solution is to just give them what they want. Her face darkened. You think you're so untouchable, but people in this neighborhood see what you're doing. I gestured toward her empty clipboard. Yeah, and how many signatures have you got? She clutched the clipboard to her chest, her expression tight. I grinned. That's what I thought. With a final glare, she turned and stomped away, but I knew she wasn't done. And sure enough, a few days later, she tried one last stunt. I was coming home from work when I saw it. 2 bright orange traffic cones were placed in my driveway. Between them, a cheap plastic reserved parking sign stood proudly, as if it had any real authority. And to top it all off, a handwritten note was taped to the sign. This driveway is now designated for shared community use. Violators will be reported. I stared at it for a long moment, blinking. Then, I burst out laughing. She had officially lost it. I snapped a picture, then calmly walked over and picked up the sign and cones. With a casual toss, I dumped them onto Olivia's front lawn. She must have been watching, because her door flew open within seconds. What do you think you're doing? She shrieked. I turned to her with the biggest smile I could muster. Oh, I'm just moving your garbage off my property, I said sweetly, her hands balled into fists. You have no right. No, Olivia. My tone shifted, my patience finally gone. You have no right. No right to park here. No right to harass me. No right to turn this into some ridiculous campaign for fairness when all you're doing is making a fool of yourself. Her face turned bright red. You think this is over, I laughed. Oh, I know it's over. And with that, I turned on my heel and walked inside. I knew Olivia wouldn't back down, so I took precautions. I installed a security camera facing my driveway. I put up a new sign, a real one, stating, "Private property, no parking. Violators will be towed." I preemptively called the tow company and let them know I might need their services again soon. Sure enough, it didn't take long. A few nights later, my phone buzzed with an alert from my security camera. I checked the footage and there she was, Olivia. Parking in my driveway again. I didn't even step outside, I just made a call. 30 minutes later, the tow truck arrived. And the next morning, oh, Olivia lost her mind. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of furious knocking on my front door. I already knew who it was. With a smirk, I took my time getting out of bed, stretching, and casually making my way to the door, fully prepared for the spectacle awaiting me. I cracked it open just enough to see Olivia standing there, red-faced, eyes wild, and practically vibrating with rage. She didn't wait for an invitation. "Where is my car?" she shrieked. I took a slow sip from my coffee mug. I'd guess somewhere in an impound lot by now. Olivia let out a full-body scream, the kind you'd expect from a horror movie, not a grown woman fighting over someone else's driveway. "You have no right to keep doing this to me," she screeched, jabbing a finger at my chest. "This is harassment. I'm calling the police again." I crossed my arms. "Great, let's call them together." Her eyes widened slightly, like she hadn't expected that response. But she was too deep into this tantrum to back down now. With shaking hands, she pulled out her phone and called 911 right in front of me. I honestly couldn't believe it. I leaned against the doorframe, waiting for the inevitable. About 20 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up. 2 officers stepped out, and the moment Olivia saw them, she rushed toward them like a desperate contestant on a game show. "Officers, you have to arrest him. He keeps stealing my car and having it towed." One of the officers sighed, rubbing his temples. "Ma'am, you called us about this before, correct?" "Yes, and you didn't do anything. He's a menace. He's abusing his power." I raised an eyebrow. "My power as a homeowner." One of the officers turned to me. "Sir, did you have her car towed again?" I smiled and held up my phone. "Yep. And before you ask, I have everything recorded." I pulled up my security camera footage and showed them clear video proof of Olivia parking in my driveway in the middle of the night. I could practically hear her soul leaving her body. "Well, that doesn't prove anything," Olivia stammered. One officer squinted at the footage. "Ma'am, this very clearly shows you trespassing." "That's not trespassing," she snapped. "I'm part of this neighborhood." The second officer folded his arms. "That doesn't mean you get to park on someone else's property." But he had no right to tow my car," the first officer sighed. "Ma'am, you were warned. You ignored multiple notices. This is a civil matter, not a criminal one. If you want your car back, you'll have to pay the impound fees." Olivia's entire body went stiff. "I'm not paying anything." "That's not our problem," the officer said flatly. I could tell Olivia wanted to scream again. But for the first time, she was realizing she had no way out. She opened her mouth, then shut it, then, with zero dignity left, she spun on her heel and stormed off. But not before screaming, "You haven't heard the last of me," I grinned. Oh, I was counting on that. I thought maybe, just maybe, Olivia would finally let it go. I should have known better. Because 2 days later, I found a brightly colored letter from the HOA taped to my front door. I ripped it open, skimming through the nonsense inside. And then I laughed. Olivia had filed a formal complaint against me for creating hostility within the community. The best part, she demanded that I be forced to financially compensate her for the towing fees. Oh, this was just too good. I didn't even wait. I marched straight to the HOA office and slapped the letter onto Greg's desk. He looked at it, sighed, and shook his head. "Yeah, we're not entertaining this," he said. I grinned. "So I don't owe her a cent?" Greg chuckled. "No. In fact, if she keeps filing false complaints, we might have to take action against her for harassment." Now that got my attention. "What kind of action?" I asked. Greg shrugged. "Worst case, we start issuing her fines. If she racks up enough violations, we could even push to have her removed from the HOA entirely." I beamed. "Oh, please do that." Greg laughed. "We'll see, but for now, you're in the clear." I left that office feeling lighter than air. Olivia had just backfired on herself. But she still had one last trick up her sleeve, and this time, she was about to make her biggest mistake yet. That weekend, my wife and I went out for dinner. Nothing fancy, just a relaxing evening, but when we got home, something felt off. I stepped into the driveway and noticed a single piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. Confused, I pulled it off and read it. "You think you won, watch your back." My stomach turned. I spun around, eyes scanning the street. Nothing seemed out of place. But suddenly, I had a very bad feeling. I turned to my wife. "Go inside, lock the doors." She looked at me concerned but didn't argue. I pulled out my phone and opened my security camera app, and that's when I saw it. Olivia, walking up my driveway in the middle of the night. Trying my door handle. My blood ran cold. I didn't waste time. I immediately called the police. Within minutes, officers were at my house. I showed them the footage, my hands shaking with adrenaline. One officer nodded. "Yeah, that's attempted trespassing, maybe even attempted burglary." Another officer frowned. "She tried the door." I replayed the footage. "Yep, twice." "Well," the officer said, pulling out his notepad, "I think it's about time we had a little chat with Miss Olivia." I watched as they walked straight across the street and knocked on her door. Olivia opened it, and the moment she saw the officers, she turned ghost white. I wish I could have heard what was said, but judging by how fast she started panicking and waving her arms, it wasn't going well for her. After a few minutes, the officers came back. "She's officially been issued a trespassing warning," one officer said. "If she so much as steps on your property again, she'll be arrested." I exhaled, feeling an overwhelming sense of relief. It was over, really, truly over. Olivia never spoke to me again after that night. She avoided eye contact, and every time she saw me, she practically sprinted inside her house like I was carrying a lawsuit in my pocket. Eventually, she sold her house and moved. Nobody missed her. To this day, my driveway remains blissfully Olivia-free. And as for me, let's just say, the tow truck company and I are on a first-name basis now.